Hey guys, Fox here, and today it is time to update the opening week Ultramodern Spring Football Games tier list as we just finished the UFL 2025 season's opening week. Now, this is a tier list that we have been doing while we made the first one after the 2023 XFL's opening week, and we've been continuing it after every single opening week of a new spring football season. Now, the tier list itself, in case you don't remember or this is your first one that you're watching, the tier list starts at F, of course, with the Maulers vs. Bandits 2022 USFL game. Then a pair of 23 XFL games are in the D tier with the Battlehawks Brahmas and the Guardians Roughnecks. Then in C tier, we have the 2022 Stars vs. Breakers and the 2024 Showboats vs. Roughnecks games. Then in B tier, we have the Panthers vs. Gamblers in 2023, 2023 Vegas Vipers vs. Arlington Renegades, the 2023 Generals Stallions rematch from 2022, and the 2024 Battlehawks vs. Panthers game. Now, A tier is the tier that has the most games at the moment, with the famous Lemon game between the Dragons and the Defenders in 2023, the 2022 Gamblers Panthers Underrated Classic, the Maulers Breakers 2023 opener, the Stars Showboats 2023 opener, and the Stallions Renegades 2024 season opener from last year in 2024. As for S tier, we have the classic spring football game between the Generals and Stallions, the first game of the 2022 USL season, and the shocking S tier game being the Defenders Brahmas from last year. That was a really shockingly good game. So that is the current tier list. Of course, C tier are for your insanely average game, D is for the bad games, and F is for those bad games that have essentially no redeeming quality. A tier and B tier are for the good and great games, and S, of course, is for the top tier games. So without further ado, let's get started with the first game being the Battlehawks Roughnecks game. This one was relatively easy to rank because of the fact that this was a total one-sided blowout. But it's important to note that just because a game is a blowout, or hell, could be a shutout, doesn't necessarily mean it's an F-tier game. An F-tier game is one that is just truly a bad experience to watch in every single way. Not a close game, nothing really exciting happened, it wasn't, at least funny to watch, it was just a bad game. This wasn't that. It was still not a good game, obviously, but I think D tier is a solid place for this one. This was one of those where I was live streaming, I put out a poll. There were some people who said it was like a C tier game because it was at least really funny to watch with the Roughnecks struggle so bad, and some said it was an F game. D was the common consensus, though, and that's where I viewed it as well. The Anthony Brown stuff was just hilarious to watch, so at least you would get some joy from that, unless you're a Roughnecks fan, of course. And overall, it was really fun to see guys like Jacob Sailors and Ja'Cour Pearson play like the way they did. This wasn't like the Bandits Maulers game, which was just a low-scoring bad football game in 2022. This was a better game. It wasn't a good game. Obviously, it's in D tier. But I think that's a solid spot for it. I think D tier, it's a good place. Again, it's one of those games that's pretty forgettable. Unless you're a Battlehawks fan or a Roughnecks fan, you're not really going to remember this one. The next game is, of course, the Brahmas versus the Renegades. Now, this is another one of those games that was a one-sided game. Now, in the early part, it was technically closer, but at the same token, this was a sloppier game. In terms of whether or not this was better than the Battlehawks Roughnecks is a tough call because, again, on one hand, it was a closer game early on, and I mean early on, but this was a much sloppier game overall. There was a lot of penalties, and it wasn't like the refs were just throwing penalties. It was, deserving penalties. It was just sloppy. Again, another D-tier game for me. I think this is another one of those games that you're not really going to look back on. Again, it was a great performance by the Renegades, but it's an objective game, and how good it was to watch, it wasn't. You know what I mean? Again, wasn't as bad as the Bandits Maulers, but this is one that still wasn't a great watch. Another obvious D tier. Not a close game. Not really one you're going to remember. I think this is definitely a deserving spot for it. Goes in D tier. Now, the game that I said is the best of the week was the Panthers Showboats. I think this was the best game of the week. This was one that was very close and had a lot of intricate things going on. You had multiple quarterbacks playing on both teams, a lot of questionable decisions, but you had some big plays. Jay Adams had a couple big plays. There was a couple incredible drives of the Showboats with T. Will and EJ, and I mean like one drive each. Bryce Perkins played incredible. The Panthers were able to be a very dominating team at times with Perkins on the field, and when Etling came in, not as much. Very close matchup and an intriguing game overall. This is one of those where you saw pretty much just good football from both teams. This was the most competitive game overall and the best overall football. Again, both teams, the best football played. This wasn't one team was good and the other team just wasn't doing anything like the previous two we talked about, or the game we're going to get to, which had a lot of sloppy football. Overall, this was the best, and yes, that is despite the fact that we saw some questionable quarterback decisions, mainly Danny Etling, for being honest, and the weird decisions on swapping T. Will and EJ Perry, because it technically worked twice, but when it worked, they didn't keep doing it. They switched again. It was a very weird game. And I think this is one of those we're on a rewatch. It honestly might be better to know ahead of time. Like, this is going to be a really weird one. I think this is an A tier game, but note this is clearly on the lower spectrum of the A tier. I don't think this was as good as the Gamblers Panthers back in 2022. I don't think this was even as good as the season opener last year, despite the fact the season opener last year was more of a blowout in the second half. Again, like second half. This one was a really close game. Again, the score doesn't indicate how close it was because the final score got inflated by a pick six at like the second to last play. This is one of, if not the weakest game in A tier, but I think it is an A tier game. I look at this one compared to the Battlehawks Panthers last year. The Battlehawks Panthers last year pretty much only got into B tier because of the walk-off field goal in that last drive. And I think if you eliminate that, that game wasn't great. And this is one of those where there's multiple things you'd have to eliminate. So when I compare this one to that one, that's when I kind of am like, yeah, this was a better game than last year's Panthers season opener. And so because that goes to A tier. And then the last game is, of course, the Stallions Defenders. This was the sloppiest game of the week, and neither offense looked good. There was about 2 really good plays from the Defenders offense, and Magoo scrambling was basically the only thing good about the Stallions. Again, that's not exact, of course, there's a bit other things, but overall, there's very little to really remember that isn't just Magoo running straight back 10 yards with like 3 DC pass rushers behind him. Still a weird one. Now, the biggest issue is, of course, the Stallions got shut out in the second half. So this was a game that was always technically super close, but never really felt close. It always felt like the Stallions just couldn't get it done. It was like, yes, they're one drive away, but they're never doing that one drive. And again, DC did everything in their power to lose this game, just like when they played last year. DC tried to lose, but just couldn't pull it off. The offense kept stalling. Their ground game was non-existent. Their O-line, which a lot of people have said is severely improved. If that's the case, you would have imagined they wouldn't have been a very weak ground game team, and you would imagine Te'amu would have had a better than 50 completion percentage, which he didn't. Very bad game in that sense, but this was a very close one, another intriguing one, and it did always have you on the edge of your seat because you were just one play away from something happening. Because of that, I'm putting it at the B tier. I was honestly debating putting this at C tier because, again, technically speaking, like the Showboats Roughnecks game was an insanely close game, but it was really sloppy football. But again, I do it just like I did the Panthers Showboats compared to the Battlehawks Panthers game. This was a better game than the Showboats Roughnecks. It just was. The narrative of the DC Defenders being this mega underdog, having almost nobody believe they could pull it off, and then them not only covering the spread but winning the game outright, does matter for something. The whole is it real, is it not real beef between Shannon Harrison and Skip Holtz, great TV to see. Things like that just make this one a bit better than that Showboats Roughnecks game. So again, just like the Panthers Showboats, this is on the lower end of the B tier, but it's still a B tier game. Now, overall in terms of the tier list and this week 1, I think it's safe to say you can probably guess what I'm about to say. Week 1 wise, this was the weakest in the ultramodern spring football era. The 2023 XFL held that crown because you had 2 games that were pretty bad, and you had 2 games which, one was good, but then you had the one really great one with the Dragons Defenders. This one has all their games in the exact same tiers, but they all feel a bit worse, and mainly the high-end ones. The lower-end games, you're in D tier and D tier. But the B and A tier games, especially A tier, if you were to ask somebody, would you rather rewatch the Dragons Defenders game in 2023 Week 1, or would you rather rewatch the Panthers Showboats? You're going to say the Dragons Defenders. You know what I mean? And the DC one, while yes, again, the narrative, it was better. It's just, these 2 games are much closer to being a tier down than the other ones were for obvious reasons. So this was the weakest Week 1 in the ultramodern era just from a pure game perspective. This is not counting attendance, TV ratings. This is the actual game. Was the weakest. You didn't have an S tier game like the 2022 or USFL or 2024 UFL did. This wasn't like the 2023 USFL where there wasn't a single S tier game, but there wasn't really a single weak game. Again, the 2023 USFL put in 2 B tiers and 2 A tier games, or an A tier game. It was just 2023, just better. You know what I mean? So because of that, this was the weakest overall. But overall, that'll do it. This has been Zomfox. Let me know down below what your opinions are on these 4 games where you would put them on the tier list. Is there any that are on the list from previous years that you would change? Let me know down below. Again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe, the bell turned on to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. Again, Game Picks video should be coming out on Friday at 2 p.m. EST. We'll be live streaming the Friday Night Football game as well as the Roughnecks Renegades game on Sunday. Be on the lookout for those, and as always, guys, have a great night.